Hey everybody, how's it going? Hey, for this Wednesday's large group on Wednesday night, we are going to be doing something a little differently. We're going to be meeting both at CSF and at Homestead Hall for a live time in both places for prayer and for worship solely. And I'm really excited about being able to do that with all of you. But since we're not having a teaching, what I'm doing here really briefly is I want to share about this week's method in the madness, which is worship. That is the like form and the habit that we want to talk about this week. I want to start by saying, like, when you think of worship, what is it that you actually think of? I would guess that for the majority of us, when we hear the word worship, we think of singing. And you might think of maybe your favorite worship band, or you may think of going to church on Sunday, or maybe coming to CSF for a Wednesday night large group. You may also think of it as, you're thinking maybe a little deeper than that, like our response to God for like who He is, being all powerful, being God. Or maybe for like the things that He's done for you personally, or just for like humanity through Jesus. Worship is a reaction to just like the goodness and power of God. I think of Isaiah, having this this reaction when he sees the Lord in the book of Isaiah. He's like, woe is me, I'm ruined. It's like his kind of answer as he sees God and sees this vision of the Lord. And if you're thinking of those things, you're thinking of like going and singing at church, or like this reaction of worship in response to God's holiness, you're definitely right. Those are definitely aspects of worshiping God. There's also just these like moments in the text calling us to be together, to be in community as we worship God, in corporate worship. And I think the author of Hebrews encouraging us to continue meeting together in community, that pops into mind for me. Or I think of Paul, who reminds us that we come together to mutually encourage each other in the faith, and to do this with like songs and hymns and spiritual songs, being part of that. That's a really cool thing that he calls us to, and that's a part of our worship in community. These things are the vocal part of worship for us, and I think they're the most attended to in the Christian faith, at least like culturally for us. But Paul reminds us in Romans 12:1 that our worship is not simply lip service, it's also our lifestyle. He writes, "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living and holy sacrifice, acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship." Paul calls us to submit ourselves as an offering to God daily. It's not this like one-time sacrifice on the altar. It's a sacrifice of our life day in and day out in service and obedience to Jesus. Paul makes it clear that pleasing worship to the Lord is never simply this like inward thing. It's not like just this private thing that happens only with us. But true worshipers show themselves to be true worshipers by a life lived in purity and in passion for Jesus, as well as this like singing and praising and praying and those kind of things. Peter writes in his first letter, "You are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's own possession, so that you may proclaim the excellencies of Him who has called you out of a darkness and into His marvelous light. For you once were not a people, but now you are the people of God." And he goes on to talk about that. And this like aspect of us proclaiming the excellencies of God is through the marriage of lifestyle and lip service. Now, this series is about training, right? This methods in the madness. It's not about just like talking theory. It's about having practical application to these things. So I want to turn towards these practical things that we can do to form better habits of worship. I'm going to quickly share 3 ways that I think we can grow, and one of them is in corporate worship. The second one is about like more like on an individual level, the things that we can do. And the third one can be dealt with in both settings. And the idea is that we are intentional with the worship that we bring in our lives, whether it's individual worship that we're having or whether it's corporate worship. So the first for corporate worship is this: prepare yourself to be in God's presence with other believers. Now that made this sound simple and like, why are you telling me this today, Adam? But I don't think we do this very well. In my opinion, it's not a thing that we do very well. We don't prepare ourselves to go into this time of corporate worship very often, to take time to get ready to worship in community. Now, this is all theoretical, okay? This is a theoretical story. But say my family was headed to church one Sunday morning and we happened to be running late because we all slept in and didn't get around early enough. Now, the kids aren't helping in the midst of all this. They're not getting their shoes on. They're not getting their coats on for us. One of them is covered in honey, which is very curious because honey was not a part of any part of the breakfast. And I'm urging them loudly, not yelling, but just urging loudly that we need to be going. We need to be getting in the car and heading to church. And as we drive away, we're all exasperated already. And that exasperation only grows for me when I get behind an extremely slow-moving car. I get stopped by every stoplight on the way to church, and then I get stopped by a train. And as we pull in to church finally, we can already hear the service happening through the walls. I finally pull the last kid's shoe on their foot and head into church and hustle in the door. And I realize in all of the hustle and bustle of this whole thing, I've left my phone and my wallet, which I needed later. And now I'm going to be thinking about that fact throughout all of service. Now, this is extreme, okay? But if this were the case, and unfortunately it has been, I would not be walking into corporate worship in a very good headspace. My focus on God would probably be pretty low in that moment. My focus on encouraging my brothers and sisters into worship would probably be non-existent. Now, it's redeemable. You can come back from that. I can come back from that. But I'm going to have to work really hard on where my mind is and where my heart is and where my just physical stress level is in the midst of that to be able to do it. I'm going to wait for the train for a second, and you all know that that's a thing, to get our headspace right. But for me in that situation, preparing for worship could look like me going to bed a little bit earlier on Saturday evening. Maybe it's getting up earlier so as to not have to rush so much getting around for church. Maybe it's spending some time in prayer and even some time with the kids, just listening to worship music on YouTube or something before we leave. Maybe taking some time once we got there to say hello to other believers, welcoming them into this corporate time, connecting in that way, and even being there waiting and praying over what was about to happen. I'd say even going a little deeper into this, we may need to write some things as we go into corporate worship. Jesus talks about before making a sacrifice on the altar, if we know that our brother has something against us, that we would go and have reconciliation happen. And maybe that's a thing that needs to happen before our worship time, so that we can be prepared to literally come into worship with our brothers and sisters, to come into the throne room and to be ready to do it. So just some thoughts there. I don't know what it needs to be for you, but those are some ideas. I think too often we walk in carrying the stress of this day, and our minds are here and there, all over the place, when the point is that we're there to worship Jesus, and we're there to encourage the bride of Christ together in praise of Him. So that was number one. Prepare yourself for corporate worship. Number two is this: take time every day for some self-prompted praise of God. There are other prompts out there that I'm sure a real quick Google search would reveal for you, but I have two favorites, and they're this. The first one is Father, you are, ... Father, you are, and you fill in the blank. And the other one is this: Lord, thank you for ... Lord, thank you for, and then you fill in the blank of that. These are worshiping Him for who He is, this idea of Father, you are, and filling in that blank, and then for what He has done, thank you for, and you fill in the blank. And they help us to take time to praise Him for His attributes and His action. And they're super easy. You can do this as you're like walking to class, while you're driving in your car, while you're taking a shower. Like, it's super easy to just do this and to fill in these blanks. Father, you are loving. Father, you are wonderful. Father, you are all wise or just or caring. Father, you are gracious and compassionate. Father, you are slow to anger. Father, you are rich in love. Father, you are near, all powerful, creator, sustainer, protector, healer. Father, you are the one that sees us. Father, you are my Father. Father, you are my friend, my Savior, and the list goes on and on. These things that come to mind, you can praise Him and tell Him these things as an act of thanks and praise. And then, the Lord, thank you for providing a job. Lord, thank you for food. Thank you for friends or school or a warm house. Lord, thank you for saving us. Lord, thank you for your grace, for your love, for being near to us. Thank you for making a way for us to be saved. Thank you for dying and rising again, for creation, for color, for sunrises, whatever, leaves, warm drinks, coffee, whatever that be. Lord, thank you for. These are super easy things to do, but again, they help us to incline our hearts and our minds in a posture of worship on a daily basis. Being intentional to do this on an individual level helps us to have our hearts pointed toward Jesus on a daily basis, and it's a huge help to us in our worship to be able to continually bring our mind back to that, but also it's a practice that we can work out and turn it into a habit of praise that we walk around with. I believe it helps us, even as we walk into corporate worship, to be practiced in the art of praise by doing those things. The writer of Hebrews in chapter 13, verse 15 says, "Let's continually offer up a sacrifice of praise to God, that is, the fruit of lips praising His name." Now, the final practical challenge that I want to mention, first, it was preparing ourselves for coming into corporate worship. The second one was these intentional acts of personal praise to God, that we prompt ourselves and we do those things. Now, the third one is this: is to be intentional with your posture. Something that struck me for a long time was this brief point that C.S. Lewis makes in his book, The Screwtape Letters, about our posture aiding our spirit. He makes this point, and I'm not going to read the exact quote, but he makes this point that our minds and our hearts may not start out fully engaged. They may not be engaged initially, but when we posture ourselves in a certain way, that the mind and the heart follow the body into that. And it's really intriguing to me, but it's also very, very true. So I may be having trouble focusing on the Lord and His holiness in corporate worship, or in my home while praying these God you are phrases. So maybe I need to kneel in that moment and help in that way move my heart and mind along with worship towards Jesus. Or maybe I'm singing I Surrender in corporate worship in this group setting, but I'm not really feeling much like surrendering, but I want to. In that moment, raising my hands as this act of physical surrender to God will help me incline my heart in a posture of surrender, and will put myself in a more open position before the Lord to hear from Him, to let Him speak into the things going on in my life, to give away the things that I need to Now, this can be uncomfortable, especially in corporate worship, and I get that. I'm an introvert. I also am a private person, and even to this day, for me, many years into following Jesus and many years into worshiping Him, I have this like game of getting over myself when raising my hands or kneeling in group worship. But the thing is, we want to find a balance of authentic worship to God. It's like real and like really happening in us, but also not being like distracting to those around us who are also trying to worship in unity with each other. But I think we can handle that if our heart is right with what we're trying to do. So here's a few postures to try out. Raised hands as an act of surrender, or just worship. So like raising our hands in worship, and this again is corporate or individually, or possibly kneeling. And if I kneel, I'm going to go off camera, so I'm not going to do that. But like kneeling as this act of submission, or like speaking into God's lordship, like His authority over us, or just like as a reaction to His holiness. We can do this like upward facing hands thing. I'm trying to get it here, on the camera. This like upward facing hands thing. It's like openness, like receptivity. Lord, I want to hear from you. I want to be changed by you. I want to just be open to what you are calling me into. Or sometimes, and this is a little awkward the way that I'm doing it, but like I wouldn't be up this high probably, but like a downward facing kind of thing of I'm releasing this to you, Father. Like this is a sin that I am releasing to you. This is something that may be coming into like idolatry. Like I'm focusing too much on these things, and I want to release that to you, Father. Like those kind of postures can be super helpful to us to help our hearts and minds follow suit in these times of worship. There are more, and I'm sure plenty of people have other postures that they can toss out there, but I think these specific ones can help us be intentional about our authentic worship toward Jesus. So, three practical things when you're going into a time of corporate worship, to be intentional about preparing yourself for it. Pray over the time, like have like pre-worship time. Give yourself time to not be bringing in stress and like craziness into that moment, but like take a breath, focus your mind and your heart on the Lord as you come in, and like just bringing in that idea of like, hey, this is us as a group, we're doing this together in community, can be a huge thing. So intentional preparation in corporate worship. The second thing is being intentional daily about these prompted praises, things like Lord, I thank you for, or God, you are, and like filling in the blanks and like giving Him praise in that way, just kind of prompting yourself to do that in your spare time. And then the third thing is to make use of posture, both in individual worship and corporate worship, to like raise our hands or to kneel or to do these different postures when appropriate. So I just want to encourage you in that, encourage you to use these tools. That's what all these things are. They're tools to take or leave, but to hopefully bring us into this like greater place of like intimacy with the Lord and chasing after Him. We want to just go deeper into that. So I hope that they help you to draw near to the Lord as you worship Him. And it's such a gift to be able to even come like into the throne room, into this place of like giving God praise and honor and glory. So I just pray that we're like a community of people, that we're a people that do that well. I love you guys. We love you all. And we're looking forward to just finishing the semester out strong with all of you. All right. Take care.